And hello, everyone. I'm Gina Ray Foster, Director of the John Jay Teaching and Learning Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I'm here with Christen Madrazo, winner of the Distinguished Teaching Prize Award in 2024. Christen Madrazo, welcome.
Thank you, Gina, for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy and I'm excited. We rarely get a chance to talk, and this is a wonderful opportunity. I am taken by the fact that you have won this award twice. And when we looked in the selection committee at the growth you had made in your teaching and the changes between 2016 and now, it was evident in so many places that you had invested tremendous time and effort into growing and trying new things. Can you talk a little bit more about how that feels?
I have to say, when I saw that I was nominated again, I had this moment, not imposter syndrome. Do I deserve to go for this again? There's so many. I work with such wonderful folks. And I emailed you, Gina, and I said, "Are you sure? Should I do this again?" And you encouraged me to submit. And I have to say that one of the best things about being nominated for this award and creating a portfolio is the reflective aspect. I am beyond the point of writing up those dreaded Form Cs. And so I don't actually write a faculty narrative anymore and reflect on the year and submit it to someone. And that's a really good reflective practice. Not that I
Mhm.
miss doing it. I'm happy to not have to do that, but it is a really great exercise. And by the time I submitted for the second time, I thought, there's a very good chance I will not win this. This is very competitive. I've won it before. If that's not reason enough to say if it's between a few folks. And I said, but I am so glad I put so much work into this portfolio, because what an incredible reflective tool. Going back over my last 11 years at John Jay, I didn't even fully realize the growth. I know that I'm constantly doing the things I think are the right things. I'm keeping up on best practices. I'm changing things when they don't work. But to sit down and actually write about those things and to be conscious of them, there's nothing like it. That's why I think people look back on their time in school, undergrad, grad school, and it was such a formative time for them. I'm convinced that a
Mhm.
large part of this is what we call writing to learn. When you are
Mhm.
forced to write and reflect at all, no less a lot, you are just growing and learning and changing. Writing to learn is the idea that you're not writing something just for a transactional purpose. You're not writing to
Mhm.
produce and show someone. You're writing to figure something out. So I was so grateful for this opportunity because I hadn't been forced to reflect in a while in this way. And I was able to figure out, oh, it gave me ideas for moving forward in the next 10 years. The writing to learn process behind this was really excellent for me. And so I thank you for giving me that opportunity. I'm not sure if that fully answers the question, but that was a lot of what was on my mind while preparing these materials. Just wow, what a great opportunity to reflect.
It's so interesting you say this, Kristen, because I hear this from so many nominees. And I do think that these processes are a marvelous opportunity, almost serendipitous, for us to learn about what we are doing and think about our next steps. And the college, the larger community of teaching and learning is only the better for it. So thank you for that. In that spirit, then since 2016 to 2024, you've done a number of leadership roles in the English department related to writing, and you've taught several classes repeatedly. What are you learning from other teachers in this time period that's informing your practice?
That's a great question. Since I last won this award, I am definitely more steeped in the admin side of things. I still teach every semester, of course, but I also have been running the first year writing program. So I see things from the other side in a way that I didn't. And that has absolutely contributed to my growth as an instructor. I now really understand outcomes assessment. I understand why we do it. I used to sort of groan at the term. I know a lot of faculty, even hearing me say it, they're like turning off the podcast. They're like, oh, nope. But now I get it. And I understand why we do it. And it's not like policing or holding people accountable. It's it's holistic program overview. It's not about assessing any particular teacher, any particular student, or any particular class. It's about how is the program functioning with all three of those components, because it's not any one. It's not, nothing is ever just the instructor's success or just the student's success or just the program success. There's like a symbiotic relationship there. And outcomes assessment helps us understand some of those things. And then what I've learned from that is that it's not enough to just assess, right? We have to close the loop. Again, it's about reflection, right? Outcomes assessment is a type of reflection. We have to look at what's working or where the holes are, and we have to figure out what are some action steps. And sometimes it takes years to figure out or see a dent in. But again, these are all exercises for reflection. How do we address those holes? And it's
Mhm.
been incredible for me. It's like a big problem solving activity to try to figure out what are the types of faculty development that would really be helpful. What would be helpful to me? What would be helpful to my colleagues? And you can see that when you look from a bird's eye view, issues I'm having might not be issues that my colleagues are having, but they appear when you track the trends in the type of outcomes assessment that we do. It's been a total joy to not just run my own faculty development sessions, but I work with other faculty to say, look at, here's the data,
Mhm.
here's what's going on. These are things folks are reporting. This is things we're noticing. What kind of development session would you run? And my
Mhm.
colleagues, several of them, Tim McCormick, Kim Liao, come up with ideas and we run these sessions and we get faculty feedback. And then you can sort of see how the data trends over time. And all of this to say that something that I have learned along the way in admin is if you lead with what's best for students, you really can't go wrong. So this is something I learned from Tim McCormick. When I first started
Mhm.
taking over admin tasks, I was like, well, I don't know this. I would email him for everything. Well, I
Mhm.
don't know the history of this. I don't know I don't have any institutional memory on this. I don't know what's the politics of this. What's
Mhm.
everything that crossed my desk? I ran past him.
Mhm.
And what I noticed is the same thing that I apply in the classroom. He would say, just ask yourself, take out all the politics, take out all the
Mhm.
history. Just ask yourself, what's best for the students? That's your answer. And I was like, oh, well, that's what I do in the classroom. And he was like, yeah. As someone who does a little admin and a lot of teaching, I
Mhm.
think that if we lead with that, if you're really honest with yourself and you say, what's best for the students, you will know your answer, whether it's an admin problem or a teaching problem. And now I just more consciously ask myself that regularly. So this is sort of a
Mhm.
way that admin has informed my teaching.
I love where this went. I love where this went. And I constantly say to myself, what are my students asking? And what am I hearing that they're not asking?
Mhm.
And you've taken approach of decolonizing the classroom, centering students by decentering the classroom, and introducing some very serious problem solving activities that the students enjoy and think are in some ways fun. This year was our second year to ask our Distinguished Teaching Prize nominees to submit a sample assignment and rationale so that we could see them in action. And you presented something you've been doing for quite some time. Would you walk us through that? Give us some insights?
Yes, absolutely. I often start this, folks in my program and department have heard me say this all the time, but I joke that one of the major ways I decenter the classroom is that I've banned the word topic. And people always bristle at this. I even told myself, maybe don't talk about that today, but I just can't help it. I have banned the word topic in my research writing classroom. And I have replaced it with a model. It's not entirely mine. It's called SSQ. It's story, situation, and question. And I believe that all research stems back to this model. And it's inspired by Vivian Gornick's The Story and Situation. And the SSQ approach invites students to rehearse research invention. So, as opposed to just picking a topic where we just come up with something general or vague, or we're picking from things we've heard before, the SSQ approach is a way to facilitate invention. So, students look for stories. They look for stories in their everyday life. They look for stories in the news. They look for stories. I share a lot of stories from my students' story podcast. Story is at the center of almost everything I do. And not just for creative writing and nonfiction writing. I'm talking about in a research context right now. I always tell students, no one would be working on this if real people's stories weren't at the core of this. Scientific researchers are only looking into stuff about XYZ cancer cells because of the real life narratives. People are affected by these issues. And it's the same thing in every other context. So I have students find the stories. It can be gossip, it can be news stories, it can be case studies from other classes. And we track lots of stories of interest. Then we widen out and we say, okay, what are the larger situations that these stories reflect? And we list all kinds of issues and topics and phrases and the larger context, the wider context. And then the next step is the Q. So it's S for story, S for situation, and Q for question. And we come up with complicated how, why questions that were inspired by the story, but not directly about the story. The third part is the question. We find stories around us, situation, we identify and map out the larger context or the situations the stories represent. And then we create how, why questions about those larger situations and contexts. And I have them write several questions, and then we workshop the questions in class. How can we make this question more specific? How can we make this more nuanced? How can we make it less pointed? This should be a true inquiry, something you're genuinely curious about, not a fake question. I know what I want to say, so I'm going to manufacture a question that helps me say the thing I want to say. No, what's something I really need to know the answer to? What's something that if we could figure out the answer to this, people's lives would improve? The other part of this is that we do many, many, many of these, and I never pressure students to find the answers or to jump into research right away. What I've noticed is if students know that they're going to have to research something or find an answer, they immediately dumb it down to protect themselves. They simplify it to protect themselves. They're very smart. I would do the same way. Don't ask something so complicated that in the next 5 minutes, when the professor asks you for the answer, you don't have it. And we spend several weeks just getting used to the idea that complicated questions are okay. And in fact, I reward them for that. Oh my gosh, that one's so hard. I would never know the answer to that. I don't even know how to begin looking for that answer. Great. And then we move on to the next one. We spend a lot of time in the beginning undoing the focus on answers and returning to questions, like the kind of questions we asked when we were kids. Why this? Why this? How does this? And we spend a lot of time bringing back the art of the question. Then we move into the question as the vehicle for research. And when we eventually move over to that, there are few students who suddenly switch back to the word topic, and immediately the work becomes general. It's something I've heard before. It's something I've read 16 versions of. And I'm like, wait. What was your question? What was the question you were really interested in 2 weeks ago? Oh, well, this, but it's hard. But they'll go back to it. So for me, it's the energy behind the question. It's the how, why question. And for me, it has to be inspired by stories, or else we just don't care. We don't care enough about the question or the topic unless there's a real story at the heart of it.
That's so good and interesting to hear. It's a process I can really see your students struggling with. And I can see so many of us struggling to teach that. So I'm so glad you described that for those of us who want to try it. it's hard. And when we teach, even when we've been teaching for 10 or 20 years, there's a point in a class, there's a point in a course where something feels hard. What is one of those points? What's something that's been a hard piece of teaching for you in the last few years that you've turned into a win?
This goes back a little bit to the last question too. I didn't fully circle back to, you had talked about decolonizing. And for me, what I meant to get at there was that a way I decolonize the first year writing classroom is by not assigning the topic, by not telling students, okay, everyone has to pick something within this realm. When each student is working from their own story and
Mhm,
their own questions, they're inventing their own research project, which is inherently decolonizing. There's not some power structure at the top who's asking the question. I'm going to ask this question
mhm,
and everyone answer this. I'm going to talk about this topic and everyone think of something within it that you want to explore. That's very power driven.
mhm,
And one, I will say that one issue I've had in the past few years, I worked really hard to sort of decenter my classroom over the last 11 years. And then hybrid came along. And I've been teaching a few of these hybrids, and I have found myself becoming sometimes a little bit more of the center of the room than I used to. And I've realized that it's because I have less time. I'm trying to cover more ground. I'm trying to move us through quickly. So that has been my biggest struggle. I worked so hard to sort of decenter in many ways, even more ways than I've shared here. One way is with that SSQ model, but hybrid left it so that sometimes we only have face-to-face moments for an hour and 15 minutes. I've found myself occupying too much space. So I am currently looking for ways to decenter that space again in new ways because the modality shift, this is a new terrain. So I think the answer, and I'm still working it out, I'm really interested to talk with other folks about this, decentering the hybrid classroom is more of the flipped model,
mhm,
getting out the the lesson or the sharing or the screencast, producing more of the lessons in ways you wouldn't have before, in ways that don't require that you deliver it in person, so that your in-person time can truly be spent hearing from others, workshopping
mhm,
with others. It's less in-person space, and now you have to share it
mhm.
even more than you ever did before. That's the newest challenge, and I feel good about the way it has come along,
Mhm.
but there's more work to be done, as there always is.
Agreed, definitely. And that pressure to deliver content, that pressure to stay on topic, and I'm going to repeat that word that you said you take out of the classroom. It comes back, right? Because the classroom is kind of designed to be topic driven, content driven. So kudos to you. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. I know that the English department has a reputation for faculty collegiality and getting together over coffee and tea, talking, sharing stories, sharing questions. And I am interested in hearing some of the questions you've been hearing traded recently and perhaps a story that you've been sharing.
We are always asking each other questions, and we do communicate quite a bit. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. I love my colleagues. I love the
Mhm,
students, obviously, that's a given.
mhm,
I want to keep asking questions about modality. And
mhm,
like I said before, I'm particularly interested in how modality is in conversation with our ongoing conversations about decolonizing the space. I really think this is some uncharted terrain. We have all these new modalities that we never had before. Some of them are even hard to keep track. I have notes on a post-it. There's more modalities than we maybe I'm know. Interested in hearing the ways folks have faced some of these same challenges, how limited time in person with students. Also, attendance has shifted. So that's one thing I've noticed over the past few years. I'm interested in the way modalities have affected attendance at all and the way we all occupy space when we're there. It's not a Zoom class anymore, but have we fallen into some habits where we sort of sit as if we're in a square? Do we come in and out? Or is it like the old rules? You have to come to class every single day. Are instructors feeling the pressure to just deliver more and fast? And how can we meet students where they are and with their modality needs, but still keep things decentered? These are all questions I have, the relationship between these two things. I think these are new questions that we need to be thinking about.
Two-time winner of the Distinguished Teaching Prize at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Christen Madrazo. How does being a teacher inspire you to get up and inspire students and be even more to the rest of us?
Oh, thank you. For me, I've said this before, it's all about the stories. The stories never get old. They are always changing and they always teach me something. Students in my creative nonfiction class are telling stories that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to share that with my research class because they're going to really dig into the socio-political implications of what happened to this person. Can't wait to get it on the podcast. And vice versa. I'm constantly connecting my students from one arena to my students with the other arena because I get so excited about the new stories and the way that sheds light on what we need to research and what we need to be looking into. And so for me, it never gets old because I'm not every semester teaching the same thing. It's not, oh, now I give my lecture on this. It's always rooted in the stories the students bring to the classroom. We create questions, how, why questions based on those questions. And then we go through how do we craft that story? Or if we're in research class, how do we ask the right questions about that story? And then how do we pursue complicated answers through scholarly sources, through non-scholarly sources? So nothing ever gets old to me because the students are constantly changing and their narratives are constantly changing. And you notice trends and patterns, but no one's stories are exactly alike. They connect us, but they also, in a lot of ways, define us as individuals. So no first year writing class I teach will ever be the same because the students are bringing the content. And then I'm helping shape and guide and mentor. We can't lose that. We can't lose this no matter what's happening with the modality. We can't lose the time. We can't lose any more decentered time. Because if not, we don't have students bringing their voice and their work and their interests to the room. And that's really what inspires me all the time. Movies I see, walking down the street, I'm always sort of, oh, that's just like what so and so told me happened to them recently. In a lot of ways, they're my windows to the world and to worlds I wouldn't know about. And I'm so thankful for them for showing me their narratives and telling their narratives, whether they tell it on the podcast or just in the research class. Sharing our narratives is important. I believe it's one of the most important things. I think it's at the core of interdisciplinary work. It's important in every single subject field. If people aren't sharing their stories, it means that they are not empowered. Someone's sharing their story somewhere, and it might as well be you. Because historically, the folks who are not sharing their stories are not the people in power. So let's get out there and let's share our stories.
Thank you, Kristen. What a pleasure and a privilege. So glad to be working with you.
Thanks, Gina.